I think and I hope that you've all seen just the remarkable change in Mark. Can you just put yourself in his shoes and just feel the inspiration that he got when Barnabas and Peter said, "You need some help. We'd like to help you." And Mark, he was responsive, wasn't he? He took that mentorship in and then he sat down to write this gospel. And as a Levite, it's a remarkable gospel that he wrote, brothers and sisters. It truly is. It actually appears that Mark wrote his gospel to help begin the ecclesia at Rome. That's a suggestion I'm going to make, and I'll put some slides up in a minute that might just show some unique features. And you'll see one thing about Mark's gospel is that he uses language that non-Jews didn't understand. He uses Latin words. He's writing to a Roman audience. And Paul in Romans 15, just as an aside, do you remember Paul in Romans 15? He's writing to the Romans, isn't he? He's writing to the Romans and he said, "I never came to you first, okay, because I didn't want to build on another man's foundation. That's not how I operate. I don't come in and take the credit for what someone else has done. You Corinthians and others, okay, you do that, but that's not what I would do. Someone else has already established the Roman ecclesia, and Paul wouldn't take the credit for that. And I believe it was probably Mark. In fact, it's quite unique that in Romans 16, the list of all the names, that in the salutations, one of them is called Rufus in Romans chapter 16. Rufus. Salute Rufus, chosen in the Lord, his mother and mine. Do you know the only other time the name Rufus occurs is in Mark's gospel? There appears to be a relationship, probably, between Mark and Rufus of some description. Rufus was the son of Simon the Cyrene. Remember Simon the Cyrene, who worked with the Lord. He followed the Lord. He was a servant following behind the Lord. And so in Mark 15:21, we find the only other occasion of the name Rufus. So here's Mark. He's going to write this gospel, and he gets the ecclesia at Rome going. And you can see from this slide here that one of the unique features of the Gospel of Mark is he has to write and explain things that non-Jews wouldn't have known or understood, like Jewish customs. Why would you need to write what the washing of hands is all about in Mark 7, for example? Or explain what the preparation day is in Mark 15. And then he translates Aramaic words and puts different meanings, different words in for all of these Aramaic words. And then he also uses Latin terms. And there's quite a lot. And I've just put the list there of all the Latin terms, which would be what a Roman audience would have known rather than a Jewish audience. And so this gospel is what Paul finds and causes him to see value in Mark. And that's how we suggested that Mark comes back into favor with Paul again. Now, this gospel is very simple. It's not a hard gospel to understand because Mark's going to tell us that the message Jesus gives is not a hard message. It's not complicated. It's a very simple message. In fact, the simplicity of the message is going to be Mark's point. There's so many messages, you see, out there, he says, all trying to crowd out the simplicity of this message of the servant. And so here he is, the failed servant, but the first to write a gospel record. And it's done in the most amazing way. It's got structure. You'd expect that from a good recorder, a good Levite. And he uses techniques to help you remember what's going on. One of the techniques, and I have got some slides on this, but there's 12 of them in total, so I thought I won't put them all up there. But one of the techniques that he uses is called interpretative intercalations. I'll say it again. Interpretive intercalations. Now, of course, I had to go and look that up as well, so don't worry. I didn't know what that meant. But basically, what Mark does is he takes one story, he begins with one story, he introduces another story, and then he returns to the first story. Okay? So a little bit like a sandwich, isn't it? Got the bread on top and the bottom and the meat in the middle. And Mark does this. It's ever so simple as a technique. And he does this about 12 times. They're called Markan sandwiches. I like that term. I think it's quite neat. In fact, next time you listen to the BBC or some news channel, just watch out. It's actually a technique still used. We use this idea of starting with a story, introducing another one, and returning to the first story. It's a well-known technique that's used. So, just some unique features in Mark's Gospel. In Mark's Gospel, it's full of action, okay? It's not long, lengthy speeches, Sermon on the Mount, 3 chapters, big, long, lengthy speech. It doesn't have that in Mark. In Mark's Gospel, actions speak louder than words. And it's drawn out of the idea of that word that we saw, where he's on the move. Everything's done immediately, straightway, forthwith. But more than that, it's also unique that teaching is done through action, and in this case, there's not many parables. Mostly it's through miracles, and there are 18 miracles recorded, which is quite a sizable number of miracles when you think that Mark's only got 16 chapters. It's the smallest of the Gospels, and yet it's got a remarkable number of miracles. Teaching was done through action. And of course, the actions are dramatic. They're vivid. They're well detailed. Some of the things written in Mark's Gospel, of course, Matthew and Luke borrow and write the same, but they tend to shorten the version down. Mark puts all the detail in. He's like a journalist on the spot, recording things as an eyewitness. And, for example, Mark, in the feeding of the 5,000, says that he sat them by companies on green grass in ranks by hundreds and fifties. That's a lot of detail to tell you just how the people sat down. All right? He's painting a picture. He's giving you a vivid illustration. He's making you feel like you're there. He wants you to feel like you're actually there listening to Jesus. Matthew and Luke, Matthew just says grass. So he puts the fact that there's grass there. And Luke only says 50s. It's Mark that puts all the other details in. He includes vivid imagery and dramatic language that's often got passion and emotion. I do have a slide as well that shows that Mark's probably the gospel that shows more emotion than any other gospel. In fact, it's only Mark's gospel that says Jesus got angry on one occasion. The other records don't record that. And then he uses the historical presence. He writes as if you're there. It's not past tense, it's present tense, to make his readers become participants and not just mere observers. He wants you to be involved in the story. But Mark's very quick to show that there's opposition to everything that Jesus does. And by chapter 3, everybody's against Jesus. It's much earlier in Mark than the other Gospels. The Pharisees are offside by the end of chapter 3, and his own family are offside by the end of chapter 3. But the one we want to pick up on and have a look is the disciples. Where do they stand in relation to all this? Well, the poor disciples, we said before, not one good word is said about the disciples in the whole of Mark's gospel. Just put yourself in the shoes or the sandals of the disciples, brothers and sisters, and just receive the words of Jesus. I'm going to show you a little bit later just how much the disciples must have felt inadequate from Mark's point of view. So the Jews have issues of authority, and the disciples have issues of comprehension. And his own family also have issues. They're not willing. They actually, in fact, it's very unusual. They said he is beside himself. Now, that's an expression that you probably know what that means. It's an expression of an emotion that makes you sort of jump out of your skin and stand beside yourself. Okay? Be beside yourself. Now, that could be through excitement, a birthday present or something like that. Or, put a spider under the seat of a few sisters here and you get the same expression. Standing out of your skin beside yourself. Okay? He is beside himself. In this case, it's with madness. He's beside himself with madness. We need to get him in, get him home. Okay? And so Mum and the family go out to look for him, to bring him home and say, son, it's probably time that you came home and just settled down. Things are getting out of hand. So everyone's offside by the end of chapter 3. But it's the disciples that are going to get taken on this journey. What do you think about this man, the Lord Jesus Christ? Have a look at him. What's your view of this man? Now, there are some others that come up in the story throughout Mark who do get the simplicity of the message. And that's the point. They can see it quite clearly. They don't have all the clutter of the Jews or the Romans with all their mixed messages clouding out their thinking. They know what this man stands for. And so they come to Jesus throughout Mark's gospel and they fully understand what his purpose is. But most people are just amazed and don't react to change their lives. They just say, oh, wow, this is astonishing. Look at the amazing words of this man. And then there's what's known as the messianic secret. 8 times Jesus says, don't tell anyone about this. Okay? He heals somebody or he speaks to somebody and he says, don't tell anyone about this. Keep it a secret. 8 times he says that. So why Mark does that, I'm going to suggest, is that he wants you as the reader, because he's taken you on the journey, hasn't he? He's brought you into the story. You're there on the scene. Okay? We don't want the response of the leper. All right? He's told to keep secret. Don't go and spread this abroad. But you, as the reader, drawn into the story, what's your impression of this man? Work it out for yourself. What do you think? If you do, it'll be your conviction, won't it? It'll be your own personal conviction. You've come to that by yourself, not because someone else told you. And so 8 times, Mark in his gospel, Jesus says, be quiet, don't spread what I've done and told you. So come to Mark chapter 1, brothers and sisters, that we had as our opening reading for this session. This is how he introduces his gospel. He says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I want to present to you the Son of God. He's Jesus Christ. Let me prove you that in this gospel, he says. And all the way through this gospel, individuals are being invited to take a view on this man. And as we said, he writes in the present tense in a way that it sounds like you're there, you're on the scene, you're in the moment. What's your view of this man? Do you see him as the Son of God? Now, Mark writes, as we've said, very pictorially. He doesn't record much of what Jesus actually says. What he records is what Jesus does. All right, so just have a look at verse 27. So, verse 23, there was a man in the synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out. And of course, Jesus heals this man in verse 25. Hold thy peace and come out of him. And in verse 27, it says this. And they were all amazed, insomuch that they questioned among themselves, saying, what thing is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority commandeth he even the unclean spirits, and they do obey him. Well, what do you mean, Mark, by this phrase, what new doctrine is this? I mean, isn't doctrine something that you write down, isn't it? Black ink on white paper. Isn't that where doctrines and teachings are found? When you go to listen to a lecture or a teacher? No, says Mark. No, he says. You can tell a doctrine by what a man does. Have a look at this man. Look at what he's doing, he says. And from that, you can determine what his teaching is. So, throughout the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is presented as a teacher through his actions. And you're supposed to learn things by what he does, not by what he says. And the things that he does are supposed to inspire you to know what this man stands for, to find out and understand what the teachings are that he holds to. But of course, as we said, by chapter 3, he's got everybody offside. He's been rejected by one and all in this gospel early on. His family thinks he's mad. The Jewish leaders think he's possessed by Beelzebub. And everyone has rejected him. So just have a look at Mark chapter 3, verse 21. And when his friends, his family, kinsmen, margin, heard of it, they went out to lay hold on him, for they said he is beside himself. He's mad. And the scribes, which came down from Jerusalem, said he hath Beelzebub. Everybody's saying he's possessed, either with madness or Beelzebub, which is probably the same thing. What about the disciples? What do they think of this man? Where do they stand in the record? What are they going to do with all of this action that they're witnessing? Well, I just want to focus in a little bit on one section. We can't obviously do the whole Gospel of Mark. I mean, that's a whole series. I just want to narrow it down and just have a look at one section in Mark's Gospel to show you what Mark does with the disciples. So let's just remind ourselves how this Gospel works. We know that there are two halves. We know the first half focuses on miracles and the second half focuses on suffering. It's that quote in Mark 10 and verse 45. In Mark 10 verse 45, he's the servant, who's going to be a ransom for many. He's working and he's working miracles, and then he's going to go to the cross as the suffering servant. And that's what Mark's gospel divides neatly into. But both halves have three sections. Chapter 1 to 8, or 8 verse 26, there's three sections. And then chapter 8 verse 27 through to 16 verse 20, there are three sections. And of course, Mark likes to do things in threes. I'll show you in a minute just how much he likes the number 3. And I wonder whether or not, in his life, there were 3 times he failed. 3 times he failed as a servant. They're quite noted. We know where they are. You can find them. That was his life. And he sits down and he writes his gospel, and he takes that number 3 and uses it extensively. So here's the sections, and I've put titles next to them and where they are divided. So up there in Galilee, there's a section where he is near the sea, and he's up in Galilee around the sea. But then in chapter 4 to chapter 8, he's on the sea. He's on the Sea of Galilee. That's the section we'll have a look at in a moment. But then it changes. And of course, now it's all about going to Jerusalem or in Jerusalem. So this is the ministering on the way to Jerusalem. This is the ministry in Jerusalem. Specifically, it mentions in the temple. And then we have the final betrayal, trial, death, and resurrection. So this is what he does and why he divides it into this section. Now, I can't find it for all the sections, but it is quite interesting that he uses this number 3. So in that reading that we had in Mark 1, verse 1 to 13, there are 3 stories mentioned. All of them involve a desert. 3 desert scenes. 3 scenes out there in the wilderness. And then he cuts off. You got no introduction to Jesus about his birth or his genealogy or anything like that, because servants don't have that. Who cares where the servant was born? Who cares about his genealogy? It's worth nothing. So in Mark's gospel, the introduction is over in 13 verses, and it's focused out there in the desert, 3 desert scenes. Now, I can't find anything for the second section, and I'm wondering if that's deliberate, and I haven't unlocked it yet. Maybe you might have done some work on this. But when we come to the next section, the whole section is built around 3 boat scenes. It's the word ship in the authorized version. The little boats, some of you may have gone to Galilee and seen a replica, or it's not a replica, it's an actual boat that they've discovered from around the 1st century that maybe Jesus might have even, a boat similar to that might have been used. This is the sort of boats that were built back then. 3 boat scenes. And the word ship is only found in that section. But then we come to the next section in the second half, and you get introduced to the word way, a pathway, a road, a way. And it's only found in this section. And in this section, you get 3 predictions of the coming cross. So 3 boat scenes. Now you get 3 prophecies of the coming cross. 3 times Jesus says, in 3 days I'm going to be delivered up and I'm going to be crucified. It's only there, the word way. And then you come to the next section, and the word temple is only used in this section. It's not found elsewhere in the gospel. And there are 3 specific days that he's in the temple. And he goes home each night to Bethany, and then he comes back the next day, then he goes home and he comes back the next day. 3 days in the temple. And as I said, I can't find anything for the last section. In fact, the last section seems to be written in parallel. Everything's just done in 2s in the last section. But isn't that interesting, just how Mark has structured this gospel? It's very well structured. It's got a framework that we can readily see, and then we can go in and tease open all the sections and find out how it fits within this wonderful framework. So let's have a look at this one section here, just to give you an illustration of what the disciples' journey looked like in the Gospel of Mark. Everybody else has rejected him, or there are some who can see the simplicity of the message and say, yes, Jesus Christ is my Savior. And they come up to him and have this wonderful attitude by which they accept Jesus as the servant, working hard for them. So 2 groups. Well, the disciples are in the deciding group in the middle, and that's where we are. We're on the scene with the disciples. Let's just have a taste of what they experienced. So, chapter 4, verse 1 to chapter 8, verse 26. 3 boat sins. It's the word ship. There is one word ship back in chapter 3 as a transition going into this, but all the others are found just in this section. So let me show how it works. Now, is that too small? It is a bit for the back row, all right? Depending on your age, probably. So, sorry I can't make that a little bit bigger just right now. So I'll explain it as I go, and maybe you can take a photograph or get the slides after. But hopefully the colouring might show you where we're at as we go through. Because these three boat scenes all follow the same pattern. Okay, they all follow the same pattern. So here's the first cycle. So cycle 1, it's the calming of the sea. And the pattern goes like this. First, there's a crowd scene. Then there's a boat scene. Then there's a healing. Crowd scene, boat scene, followed by a healing. Jesus with the crowds. Then there's the boat scene of stilling the storm. Then there's the healing of Legion. Okay, that's cycle number 1. Cycle number 2, chapter 6, verse 30 to 56. Again, there's a crowd scene, there's a boat scene, and then there's a healing or healings at Gennesaret, where they touch Jesus. They come up and touch him once, and they're healed. And then there's a third one. In chapter 8, verse 1 to 26. Again, it starts with the crowd, the feeding of the 4,000. Then there's a boat scene. And then there's the healing of the blind man of Bethsaida. So let's just take those 3 boat scenes and just delve into the disciples' reaction and Jesus' comments to them. So chapter 4, verse 36. So here it is, boat scene number 1. And it says, and when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. That's a wonderful expression. This servant is so exhausted. He's been working so hard. They just picked him up as he was and brought him into the ship. And so tired was he, we know he fell asleep at the bottom of the boat, and there was a storm. It was a ferocious storm. It would have woken anybody else up. But this workaholic, this servant who's got a job to do, he's only got 3.5 years to do it, has worked himself to be so tired that a storm wouldn't wake him up. He was asleep, it says in verse 38, in the hinder part of the ship on a pillow. He was gone. He was out. How can you sleep in a storm? Must have been exhausted, eh? Now, Mark has given you a glimpse of what one day in the Lord looks like back in the first section in chapter 1, verse 23 to 45. All of those events happen on one day. And if he did that regularly, I can imagine why he was so exhausted. He's working to a deadline. Got to get this done, you see. And the storm's raging. And so they call out to him because he won't wake up. He hasn't woken up. They awake him and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? Now, note this, what he says in verse 40. He says, he arose and rebuked the wind and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? Just imagine the disciples listening to that. All right, no faith. In fact, Matthew was there. Matthew listened and heard those words. And Matthew, when writing this same event, says, Peter, it wasn't quite like that. It wasn't that we had no faith. Matthew says that Jesus said, Why is it that you have little faith? But you see, in Mark's gospel, there's no validation of the disciples in any form. Why is it that you have no faith? Why is it you don't understand? No faith. Come to the second boat scene in chapter 6. Mark chapter 6, verse 47 to 50. Now, this is the occasion in the other records that Peter walked on the water. Matthew tells us that, but not here. There's no commendation for the apostles here either. So in verse 51, it says, And he went up unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased, And they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure and wondered, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. You say to yourself, how did the feeding of the 5,000, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, how did the feeding of the 5,000 have anything to do with this storm here? There was something that Jesus did in the feeding of the 5,000 that should have helped the disciples know what to do during this storm. They should have understood. Something should have got through about the Lord, but they couldn't learn. They couldn't understand that because their heart was hardened. Poor disciples, eh? So, first boat scene, no faith. Second boat scene, hearts were hard. Nothing's penetrating in. Come to the third boat scene. Now, this is remarkable, brothers and sisters. I don't know if you've just sat down and said, I'm going to read Mark's gospel on its own without knowing what's in Matthew and Luke. Just find the information out as you go along. What would you have done if you were the disciples and you had this said to you? So here's chapter 8. Now, here it gets laid on heavy. And you just cringe and you think, how would you react if you were in the boat and Jesus said this to you? Verse 13. And he left them and entering into the ship again departed to the other side. So third boat scene. Now, the disciples had forgotten to take bread. Neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we've got no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he said unto them, why reason ye because you've got no bread? Now, look at this list, okay? Perceive ye not yet, number 1. Neither understand, number 2. Have you your heart yet hardened, number 3. Having eyes, see ye not, number 4. Having ears, hear ye not, number 5. And do you not remember, number 6. And then verse 19, he says, what about the time when I broke 5 loaves among 5,000? How many baskets did I take up? Well, 12, they said. And what about the 7 among 4,000? How many then? Well, 7, they said. Well, how is it that you don't understand number 7? 7 times. Isn't that a lot? Now, Matthew actually says that they did understand that what Jesus was speaking about was the doctrine of the Pharisees and of Herod. Matthew says they got the point. But Mark doesn't record that. He just lays it on thick. You've got it wrong. Why aren't you learning? When are you going to get it? Are you ever going to get it? Is what Jesus is saying here in Mark's gospel. So boat scene number 1, no faith. Boat scene number 2, hearts hardened. Boat scene number 3, bang, 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 7 times. Why are you so thick? So I take a bit of heart from that, brothers and sisters. I think we should all take a bit of heart from that. Don't be too downhearted when you come on Sunday morning feeling like you're not a success, feeling like that you're a bit of a failure. Because the disciples were in that position as well. And Mark's deliberately doing this because we know from Matthew, which we've already mentioned, it wasn't always quite like that. Because when we measure up to the one that we meet to remember, the servant of the servant, the Son of God, nobody can measure up to him. They all fail. We all fail. None of us get it. We're all thick, standing next to the Lord Jesus Christ, the perfect servant. We can't be like him. We need him to inspire us and draw us up to be like him. The Lord is the only success story in the Gospel of Mark. That's Mark's point. Now, there is another layer to all this again, brothers and sisters. Mark goes deeper into this because here in Mark's Gospel, let me just show you this just quickly. I'm not going to spend any time on this. These 3 boat scenes have 3 stories in between each. There's the interval in between the first and second boat scene, where there are 3 stories of faith or no faith. And there are 3 stories in between the second and third boat scene, the interval there, 3 stories about understanding or the lack of. It's to do with the boat scenes. All of the stories are to do with the boat scenes. And if you want this later, I've spelled out how those interval stories actually work, okay, and how they connect back or forward to the boat scenes. And there's the second one, okay. But no time to comment on that any more than just that. What I want to do is see the next layer down that Mark is drawing our attention to, because up until now, Mark hasn't used a particular word which comes out in chapter 8, verse 15. And it's the word leaven. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. There's been miracles about bread, but there's been not the use of the word leaven. But of course, leaven is a form of bread, isn't it? And did you notice, in addition to that, it's in the context of them forgetting to take bread. And then down in verse 19 and verse 20, he says, when I turned the bread into many pieces on the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, what did you get from that? So all through this little section, the climax of the boat scenes, we get this idea that bread's quite important. They'd forgotten to take bread. He talks about leaven. They don't understand. And then he says, remember the occasions when I did this with the 5,000 and the 4,000. So bread seems to be quite an important feature. Well, here's the interesting thing. There's a section from the second boat scene down to the third boat scene, and with the intervals that I have discovered, and I think Mark's wanting us to discover this, what I call bread scenes. There are 5 bread scenes in total. And these bread scenes are quite remarkable. So you can see on the screen that I've put the letter B, but there they are. 5 loaves are multiplied, eating bread with unwashen hands. The Syrophoenician's daughter talked about eating breadcrumbs that fall off their master's table. There's the feeding of the 4,000 and the idea of forgotten to take bread. So, fitting that all in, there's quite a number references to bread. And the interesting thing is that Jesus was a bread maker, wasn't he? He increased bread. He had this small piece of bread and he multiplied it. It just increased. It grew and grew, enough to feed 5,000 and their wives and all their children, or 4,000. I'll just put them all up. So they're in brown. I hope that you can see the colour. Lots of references to bread. So for Jesus, the miracle maker that could turn one loaf into many loaves, we have recorded Jesus doing that twice. And you say, wasn't once enough? If you're recording the life of the Lord and you've got all these things that John says could have been brought into books, what do you need to mention feeding with bread twice? It seems superfluous. It seems like it's unnecessary. And yet Jesus does do it twice. But Jesus also says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Now, what does leaven do to bread? Well, leaven increases bread as well, doesn't it? So what we have here is a contrast between Jesus, the bread maker, the miracle maker, with his bread, And the Pharisees and Herod, who with their leaven increase their bread and promote their bread. There's Jesus's bread, which increases, and then there's the bread of the Pharisees and the bread of leaven, Herod, which increases. Okay, two types of bread. So here's the interesting thing. In that section that we just saw, there's actually one lengthy story about the Pharisees and one lengthy story about Herod. So just come back to chapter 6 and have a look at Herod's leaven. Okay, here it is, Herod's leaven. Chapter 6, there's a lengthy section about how John the Baptist and Herod had many discussions, and then on this occasion here, we know that Herodias had an in for John and, of course, manages to persuade Herod that he should be killed. But just have a look at verse 20. It says in verse 20, "For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and an holy, and observed him. And when he heard him, he," that is, Herod, "did many things and heard him gladly." Now, I don't know what the many things might have been, but it would seem here that Herod, he didn't like what John was telling him. He resisted everything that John was saying to him. He said, "There's one thing you need to do, Herod. It's quite simple." And Herod said, "I don't want to hear that." And he tried to disguise it. He tried to cloud it out. What he did was many other things instead, rather than doing the one thing necessary. Can you see that in verse 20? One thing, John said to Herod, and then he went and did many other things to just distract him from the one thing that was necessary. What about the Pharisees? We'll come over to chapter 7. So that's Herod, okay? So there's his leaven. That's his spreading of one thing into many. That's what he did. He would cloud the one thing with all these other things. The one thing necessary multiplied into many unnecessary things for Herod. But here is one story about the Pharisees. This whole idea of bread again, right? In chapter 7, we read in verse 4, "And when the Pharisees come from the market, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be, which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups, pots, broken vessels, and tablets, etc." And he says the same in verse 13, "Making the word of God of none effect through your traditions which you have delivered, and many such things you do." So they had just the very simple law of God, the law of Moses to do, and what they'd done is they had increased it into these many other things, all of these little rules, all of these external things which were never mentioned in the law, but they expanded it into these many other things. They had introduced additional rules to all the commandments, and they missed the whole point of the one simple command, and they multiplied it into many additional rules. They're a little bit like, brothers and sisters, I just mentioned technology. The technology of today is just like that, isn't it? Take one simple event and turn it into multiple things. One thing becomes many. And it's getting harder and harder to talk about the single clear message of the scriptures of the Lord Jesus Christ because of the multiple amount of voices and opinions filling the airwaves, crowding us out. And if we let our heads be filled with all of that chaos, all of that messaging, it'll never help us one bit. What we need is the simple, clear message that Jesus spoke, and it gives us that clarity of pathway and direction that we need. So here's the remarkable thing. In this section, there is also two miracles, one of a man, one of a woman, where many things are reduced down to just one, like the opposite. Here's the first one in chapter 5. This is the antidote to the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. It's right here. This is what we need to be like, and Jesus is doing this so that the disciples can witness this and learn from it. So here in Matthew chapter 5, there's a man called Legion, and immediately you know that Legion means many. Many. And he had all these many voices in his head, quite literally, all telling him to do this and to do that without any reason. He had a messed up life. He was violent and unreasonable. He's doing crazy things, wasn't he? He's a little bit like the radicalized lives of those caught up with all these voices today, isn't he? You can't change them because they've been radicalized. They've got all these voices telling them to do the craziest of things. And Jesus, in a single moment, rejoices all those voices down to just one. He reverses it and brings it all down just to one. So in verse 15, and they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil and had the legion, the many, sitting and clothed and in his right mind. One clear message, one clear voice in his head, the voice of Jesus. And Jesus' voice was able to cut through all that clutter in his head and help him to see clearly. Is what we're listening to, brothers and sisters, or reading, or being involved in, causing us to be a bit foggy? To be a bit irrational? Well, this is what Mark is getting us to understand. So Jesus took the many voices and reduced them down to the true one. But there's another story. In this chapter, we have the healing of a woman with the issue of blood. And it says in chapter 5, it's actually one of these interpretive intercalations because it starts with Jairus, then you get the woman with the issue of blood, then you return back to Jairus. So here's a Markan sandwich, all right? And her story is the meat in the middle. It's the crux of the story here. Now this woman, it says in verse 24, Jesus went with him and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years and had suffered many things of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was nothing bettered. Actually, she was getting worse. All of these things that she had never worked. In fact, her life was going backwards. She spent all her money. And she'd heard all these experts, all these opinions of hundreds of doctors, all giving their qualified take on her condition. And she was going backwards, not forwards. And you hear that today, don't you? Everyone is an expert. Everyone has an opinion, a qualified opinion. In fact, go on the BBC and they actually ask you for your opinion. Your opinion's valued, they say. And it's making things worse, isn't it? Not better. So she knew she had one last expert to try. She's desperate. But it seemed the best and only reasonable thing left to do. So she touched the garments of this man who spoke with clarity and thoughtfulness that she had never come across from any of the other doctors. And that one touch dramatically changed her life. And Jesus reduced those multiple doctors' opinions and remedies down to just one touch of his garment. And isn't that what this world needs? Just one touch. And they're soon going to get it, aren't they? But Mark is saying we can do this for ourselves now. We can reduce the fog of worldly voices down to just the simple, clear voice of Jesus Christ. And it will give you a healthy mind like Legion. And it will give you a healthy life like the woman, won't it? This is what Jesus is doing here. So, the many healers and their messengers who couldn't help were made redundant by the one healer with the message that could. to not just leave it at that, there is one further thing. We mentioned that there's the feeding of the 5,000 and there's the feeding of the 4,000. The 5,000 happened in Jewish territory and the 4,000 happened in Gentile territory. Jew and Gentile can both be faithful servants. It's not limited. The spreading of the gospel message can be both. And that's what Mark's message of Jesus is all about. So, summarizing, there's 2 miracles of multiplying bread. There's 2 events of one misunderstood good thing being multiplied into many bad things, the unbelieving Herod and the unbelieving Pharisees. And then there's 2 healings involved with many bad messages being reduced down to just one good message. So here's the crown on top, brothers and sisters. Come back to Mark chapter 8. Let's just see how Mark brings this to a crescendo, all right, to a climax. Because Mark, remember we said there's only 3% unique to Mark? 3%? In this chapter, in Mark 7 and 8, there are 2 miracles unique to Mark, not found in the other Gospels. Okay? So if you come back to Mark chapter 8, now that we've got the context of what this third boat scene is, how it's brought it all to a climax about bread and about understanding, just look at verse 17 again. And when Jesus knew it, he said unto them, Why reason ye because you have no bread? Perceive ye not yet? 1, neither understand. 2, have you your heart yet hardened? 3, having eyes see ye not. 4, having ears hear ye not. 5, and do not remember. 6, having eyes see ye not, and having ears hear ye not. Why does he say that? Well, because in this section, there are 2 miracles unique to Mark, one about healing a blind man and one about healing a deaf man. And remember what we've been saying all along, Jesus teaches through actions. There's 2 miracles. You disciples, you need to learn this. You will be able to understand my message by watching what I do. You've seen me feed 5,000. You've seen me feed 4,000. You've seen me heal the Syrophoenician's daughter. She understood what bread was. She understood immediately what bread meant. It's the word of God. It's a teaching. She saw it as the promises to Abraham. What about you disciples? Did you see me when I healed the blind man? Are you going to watch me and see what I do when I heal the deaf man? Well, it's interesting that these 2 miracles have similarities, 7 actually, that Jesus does in both, and he spits in both cases, but there's quite a remarkable difference. So in verse 34, he says to the blind man, the deaf man, I should say, and looking up to heaven, he sighed and saith unto him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Now, think about it. He's deaf, all right? So all put your fingers in your ears just for a minute. Put your fingers in your ears, all right? Really push hard, okay? Ephphatha. All right, take your fingers down now. Did you hear me say Ephphatha? I mean, why did Jesus say words to a deaf man? Clearly, he must have had the man right in front of him, and he simply and carefully articulated, be opened, and said the words so the man could lip read. Very simple. It wouldn't have made sense to have done it any other way. All right? He used sign language and said, be opened. But when you come to the blind man, it's very different. On this occasion, he touched the man twice. It's almost like Jesus ran out of power. Oh, it didn't work the first time. Let me just try and boost up the juice and give you another buzz, and it works. Clearly, that's not the case. Verse 23, and he took the blind man by the hand, led him out of the town, and when he had spit on his eyes, put his hands upon him, he asked him, do you see now? And he said, well, sorta. I can see men, but they're like tree trunks. I can't make out the detail. I can't see the lines of the face. Are they smiling or are they angry? I can't see any of that. So he touched him again and made him look up. And he said, I can see every man clearly. What is going on? What's the crowning part of this section, brothers and sisters? Here it is. The deaf man was in Decapolis, a Gentile territory. What do the Gentiles need to understand the gospel? They've never owned the Bible. They don't know the message of Jesus Christ. They need simplicity. Really basic, right down to basics. Jesus mouthed, "Be opened." But when it came to the Jews, because this man, he's from Bethsaida, that's Jewish territory. He needs to be persistently touched and again and again and again, because he's not getting it. He's got the law of Moses and all of that, but he just doesn't understand. Even Peter took some time, didn't he? He had to be touched a few times. The sheet had to be let down in Acts chapter 10. So when it comes to teaching, brothers and sisters, Mark's telling us how Jesus does it. And he's done it marvelously. And he's cut through all the clutter and he's helped us come down to the one clear message. But you now have to go and do that to others. You've got to go and show that to others. And there's different methods that are needed depending on who you're talking to. So let's just finish with, why did Jesus need to touch the man twice? Well, you see, the disciples were thick, you see. They weren't getting it. And so are we. We are just like the disciples. We need touching all the time. Even once a week isn't enough very often. We need to be continually touched. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus touches the disciples twice. Once in the first half, once in the second half. So in the first half, he touches them once, okay, and teaches them about who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. But what sort of Messiah? Well, the second half, a Messiah that has to suffer. Oh, I didn't understand that bit, said the disciples. Didn't think that would happen. A servant that would have to suffer, a Messiah that would have to go to the cross. So he's touching. See how Jesus is touching the disciples through the Gospel of Mark. There's your Gospel of Mark in a nutshell, helping the disciples see who this servant is, how he operates. The beginning of the gospel of the Son of God. Do you know who he is now? Can you recognize him? I won't read those two slides out there. Let's just finish in Mark 16. Mark 16. If we did find some positive words of the disciples, brothers and sisters, this would be here. But as some of you may know, there is a little bit of conjecture about how Mark's gospel ends. So this possibly may or may not have been written by the hand of Mark, but it certainly is showing you what Mark's intentions were at the end of the gospel. So verse 9 to verse 20 is in a different hand, and some of the parchments that have been found don't include this part. Be that as it may, I still think that this here is Mark's hand, even if it actually isn't his literal hand. Whoever's put this in knows what Mark wanted us to understand. And look what it says. Verse 11. And they, when they had heard that he was alive and had seen of her, believed not. And after that he appeared in another form unto the two, working as they walked and went into the country. They went and told it unto the residue, neither believed they them. Afterward he appeared unto the 11 as they sat at meat, and upbraided them with their unbelief and hardness of heart. Things haven't improved, have they? All the way through Mark's gospel. Because they believed not them which had seen him after he is risen. And he said unto them, Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Would you have used these disciples in Mark's gospel to do that work? Would you? After everything you've read about the disciples? He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be condemned. Brothers and sisters, may we take the lessons of the disciples and be able to reduce the clutter of the noise of the world down to just a simple message of Jesus Christ, and then preach that to others simple to those that need it to be simple, consistently and persistently to those that need it to be so. So that when Jesus Christ returns, we can join with the disciples, helping him to rule over this world and to begin that kingdom of righteousness.